What is going on, everybody, and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster, and I want to thank you for joining me for a short little developer interview. I have with me Premi of the Rise of Mordor team. Why don't you say hello?
Hello, everybody.
And tell us a little bit about what you do for the Rise of Mordor team.
So I'm an artist for the Rise of the Mordor. I do mostly characters, but from time to time I helped Mr. J with other stuff, such as environments and the trebuchets. But yeah, it's mostly characters that I do at the moment.
And from what I understand, you have a little bit of a bone to pick today. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So I've been looking at YouTube videos about our mod, because it's always good to see you guys review it and play it. And there's been this issue of people saying that Third Age simply looks better, or that the graphics are perhaps simpler and cleaner. And so I'm today going to talk about why this might be the case, why some people feel that way. And just for the record, I played Third Age recently, and I incredibly enjoyed it. And so I just want to say that I know sort of what I'm talking about. I'm a games art student, and I hope that you will get a better idea of why you feel that way as well. So let's get into it. I started with the environment because I think that is a crucial thing to understand. just for comparison, on the left you can see a classic medieval 2 grassland map. The trees are kind of off. They are fairly simple. They don't really fit with the rest of the environment. Whereas with Attila, you got much more coherent. The colors are a little bit desaturated, which is the whole mood of Attila anyway. So this all plays well. I would just want to point out that I have the vegetation in Attila set to the lowest, because I feel like it's doing more harm than good, if that makes sense. So now that you can sort of see there's not much of a difference in it in terms of colors, and even in terms of like complexity. You got more trees, they look more realistic, they fit in into the environment better than with medieval 2. So it's definitely not the environment that is causing the issue.
So I just have a quick question. What do you think is kind of at the root cause of this? Do you think maybe it's just a little bit of nostalgia? People have played Third Age for so long, and Rise of Mordor is kind of a newcomer on the scene, that it's different, and maybe that kind of is a bit jarring for people, or you think there's something else there?
So I think it's again, like if you spend playing a game for quite a long time, you get used to the graphics and the gameplay in general. So when you jump to something new, it's always a shock. That's just a natural response. And I think we all remember old games looking a certain way. Something that you played ages ago. And if you were to play it today, you would go, oh, that's not how I remember it looking like, Mm-hmm. So our perception is just subconsciously manipulated. And we just remember it looking really good, despite it looking kind of not good. Don't want to be harsh on your channel.
I mean, it's a 12-year-old game. We all know it's looking a little bit dated at this point. So
yes,
speak freely.
So okay, brilliant. So here's two images. Yeah, two images of the same unit. As you can see, the medieval one, the Third Age one. The units are looking brighter. They are much more simpler, they're cleaner, and they kind of look more like from the movies. And I completely agree with people if they go, oh yeah, this is the units in here look like more like the garrison from Minas Tirith than the guys over here. And I would go, yeah, that's probably true, despite these guys being more complex and more realistic. But perhaps the realism is the main issue with the cleaner look that people are sort of missing, or the simpler look that people remember with Medieval 2. Because of those modern and much more complex shaders that are trying to achieve realism, you suddenly lose the ability to properly replicate the image that you remember from movies. Like this, the shader in Medieval 2 is fairly simple, you know. If you want to do metal, you just have to make it kind of bright. You're gonna paint in some reflections, some shininess, and that's it. Whereas with the Attila 2, we have multiple textures, and all of those combined together, they make the shader that is sort of defining the reflection that is made within the engine.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. I mean,
yeah.
The models that you guys have made for Rise of Mordor are incredibly high res. I mean, they're gorgeous. But you're right, there is... I could see coming from Medieval 2 and swapping over to Rise of Mordor, there's definitely a lot more going on there in terms of what the textures and the models look like. So I can kind of see that. Again,
like the movies is something that we really take our inspiration from the most. You know, there is no reason not to. So just to sort of point out, Medieval 2, they had a sort of realistic shader in themselves. This is from the AC, and this is the Osgiliath, I believe, or something like this. And you can see that this unit is trying to replicate what we had over here. So instead of having just metal being fairly bright on its own, and then you paint in the reflections are being built by the engine, by this environment reflection. So you can see that this unit, compared to the right one, which is fake in a way, is much more darker, and it just doesn't look right. And that is mostly because, you know, the technology was super experimental at that stage, and it was just not viable to use it at that point. So another issue that people, they don't really point it out, but that's something that is a common thing with the new game, is the units are quite dark. I don't know if you ever get that impression when you're playing it.
I definitely have.
Yeah. So this is an image from Medieval 2 as well, and it's just, to me, it's like a perfect image of what's wrong with the game. So you can see that the grass is just suddenly not receiving shadows for some reason, and that can be due to multiple reasons. And you know, the new games don't really have this issue, but it's something that breaks the immersion. Mm-hmm. And then you have the Umbar units here as well, that by nature sure are dark, but when you combine them with the rest of the units, they just becomes this one dark blob as well. And so you will get this issue with certain units in Medieval 2 as well. But a naturally bright unit will not be a problem, because the lighting computation in Medieval 2 is super simple, and you will just not get this problem whatsoever.
Mm. I have a quick question. So if, let's say you're moving from Medieval 2 and you wanted to kind of ease into it, just kind of a nice visual segue, is there any tips you could give out to people in terms of their settings and that sort of thing that might help them if they're having issues with excessively dark units and maybe kind of not being able to see exactly what unit is engaged in a big blob fight because they all just kind of form into this big dark amorphous mass? Do you have any tips there?
So there are a couple of things. So the first thing is, I would really recommend just increasing the gamma. That helps quite a bit, because it just sort of eliminates this super black shadow that you will get naturally from the lighting. And there is another issue that I'll talk about a bit later. So I'll just mention it to disable it as well. But in terms of the environment, I'll actually have a slider in that, so I'll mention it as well. Sorry about that. So as I was mentioning, we take a lot of inspiration from the movies, and I think that's the main argument in here, that people remember, just like they remember their old games looking a certain way, they remember their movies and their iconic characters looking a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So this is taken from the movies without any kind of post-processing. So you can see that the same armor looks quite different in different scenarios because it's metallic. But you don't remember the Gondorian infantry looking dark in shadows, or quite dark and clouded. By the way, I think this is the only case where you can see the Citadel Guard in the movies with a shield. Do you know where is it from?
Take a quick look. Yeah, I remember which part of the movie that's from. That's from.
Okay.
It looks like maybe Osgiliath, or maybe the lead up to the Siege of Gondor.
Yes, that's from Two Towers when Faramir is getting a flashback to Denethor coming down to Boromir, where he brings his Citadel Guard. So yeah, it was I didn't know that the shield was actually in the movies.
You know, it's actually the first time I think I've seen them, and I thought, maybe that was just the invention of Taro or something, or one of the people from the Third Age team, but no, there's actually some.
Yeah, it's actually there. So yeah, but again, it comes down to people just sort of remembering certain characters looking one way, and the thing is that the metal itself on these characters is super bright in this image,
almost plasticky looking.
Exactly. Despite Veta being really 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 good at their sort of props work. They've been quite convincing with their materials throughout their whole career, and so this unit it's super it's super bright. They are surrounded by white buildings, so the reflection is naturally going to be really really bright, and that's something that you can replicate really easily with a simple shader like you have in Medieval 2. But when you have to rely on in-game reflections, such as we do in Attila, that becomes quite complex. Another good example of using movie as reference is the Galadrim armor from Helm's Deep. Yep. So, what do you think the color of the armor actually is?
Based on some of the reflections, I would say it's probably like a bronzish color, but the lighting makes it look very silver.
Yeah, exactly. I remember I was doing this armor like 4 or 5 years ago for Skyrim, and I was just couldn't get my head around it. This was the movies were pretty much the only reference I could find. There was someone trying to replicate the costume, and there were some kids' toys. But again, I couldn't really wrap my head around this. What is the actual color of the leather? What is the color of the metal? And how would I replicate it so that it looks convincing in the newer game engines as well? As well. And so I was really glad when Veta released. This is a new statue of theirs. This is Haldir, and you can see that. It really looks different from what you actually see in the movies because of post-processing and the environment being really really dark.
It looks almost brown. Almost looks like leather.
Yeah, exactly. So then they have another reference, which is the actual movie prop that they use in the movies. So this really helps us understand how it's supposed to be created. But it's not necessarily something that you would need to know for Third Age, because the Third Age Galadrim Elves, for example, they used the assets from the Battle for Middle-earth 2.
Right. And
back then the shader was the same as Medieval 2. They didn't really need to care about reflections or stuff like that, so they could just chuck it out somehow how people remember it. And when you sort of compare it to what you have over here, those two look fairly different.
So just to summarize a little bit, um, a lot. So like you said, you draw your inspiration from the movies. You take a lot of you take looks at the source material and you kind of base your models off of that. When it comes to how dark they end up being, it really ends up being two things. One, if I'm understanding this right, the environment, and two, the shaders that are inherent to the Attila engine, which tend to kind of make things a little bit darker, a little bit more washed out, and things like that.
Indeed, indeed. It's something that I'm just going to gloss over later. But I was hoping that the new Thrones of Britannia could actually fight this issue, because Attila on its own is, as I mentioned, is quite depressing.
Oh no, you thought wrong.
And everything's desaturated and kind of dark. So I was hoping that Thrones of Britannia was, a lot more bright, colourful. Turned out not to be the case, but yeah, whatever.
Unfortunately not. No.
So yeah, another sort of example of similar to the Galadrim Elves is the Uruk armor. And so on the right side you got the movie prop used by Veta. On the left side you got a prop used by the Third Age. I know that you updated your Uruk models in Reforged recently. But again, like when you compare, they see they don't look remotely like one another, which is not necessarily a bad thing. People don't really care about whether it's 100% convincing replica.
Yeah, just a decent facsimile.
Exactly, because you just got this vague memory of how they look like. If I were to hide the right image and I were to show you the left one, you go, oh yeah, that's an Uruk from the Lord of the Rings. So yeah, and then when we compare it to us, we really try to sort of, because the technology technically allows us to be more realistic with our assets, and again, it sort of comes at the cost of the ability to just replicate the movies.
Ooh,
another good example. Yeah, there's this issue when we work from reference that is supplied by Veta or the movies, and that is post-processing. So this is how people see Elrond in the Hobbit, and there were posters and marketing of him in his special red armor, and even in The Unexpected Journey. Right, he was wearing special red armor, but a picture from behind the scenes shows that, hey, that's not really the case.
Oh my goodness, I have never seen that before.
So he's in fact wearing his first age or second age Noldor armor that is not remotely, in terms of colors, looking like the one in the movies. And so that is something that we need to keep in mind when we're working with the original Veta reference compared to the movies. They actually did have his armor. This is from An Unexpected Journey, and they actually did and sort of later release official images of him in the armor, as in marketing for the Battle of the Five Armies. But that is not his armor that you can see in the movie. So that is again just sort of making our life a bit more difficult. But yeah, just wanted to point it out that there's loads of post-processing that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And yeah,
that go into the movies and might kind of turn your expectations upside down when it comes to seeing those units in Rise of Mordor.
Exactly, well put. So this is another image that sort of shows what's wrong with Attila in a way, and that is you get a different result every time you play it. And,
very true. As someone who's played a lot of 12-12 and other Attila mods like that, it looks different every time. Sometimes it just looks washed out and awful, and other times it's got, it's got a good amount of shadows in it. It gives things depth and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely very different.
Exactly, and that's really good when you're going for realistic. for realistic sort of approach. But when you're trying to pander to fans and replicate movies, that's not really what you want. You know, you never really get to see Gondorian infantry in forests. You know, that's just not going to that never happens in the movies. And so you have no idea how they would actually look. Whereas in games, it's really simple. You take Gondorian infantry with realistic shaders and you chuck it in a forest, and that's it. And that's why if you do that in Medieval 2, you will still end up with, you know, the Gondorian soldier as you remember it, even in a forest or completely different environment. And so, you know, the reason why you get these different, completely different results is because of reflections, because that's how metal works. It gets its color pretty much from the environment, and you would normally get it in today's games with a texture like this. It's an HDR cube map in a way that contains color and light, so that, you know, you would get brighter reflections based on the rotation. It just gets a bit more technical, but the way CA did it, they actually, instead of using textures, they use just the code, which is a lot more flexible and maybe more efficient, you know, because letters are more efficient than pixels. But, you know, this allows it to be random every single time you play it in a certain range. But again, it makes our lives a lot more difficult. I'm just going to pop in to what we can work with. So this is Gondor armor from a tool, from the creation kit that we can use to get our assets into game. And this is pretty much how we can test if our meshes look, if the values on them are correct. Okay, but this is you're never going to see the character looking like this in game, despite you would really want to have it like this, you know, because this is how it looks in the movies. It's white, it's bright, and that's exactly what you want, because that's how they look in the movies. But in here, there are all kinds of colors, and dark, and just, it's disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that guy, the light seems to be coming from the front, like there's a spotlight in front of him, like he's a model at a photo shoot, that sort of thing. You're not gonna get that when you're playing Attila and you're on a battlefield.
Exactly. So that really, you really have no idea how it's gonna look in game. So this is just the best that we can make it look, or that we know that it's going to work. So and the issue is that this environment doesn't work as it should because of technical limitations. So this is an image from again, Medieval 2. Sorry for the pixels. But if you actually color pick, the snow is literally pure 100% white, which is not only unrealistic, but quite hurtful for eyes as well. But whatever. The point is that those units are not affected by it whatsoever because of the simple shader. That's completely okay. That's what you expect from an old game, you know. But this is what happens when you use snow or put your units in a snowy environment, even in Attila. You'd expect those units to freaking shine because the snow is reflecting all the light. But instead, they are even darker than you know, in the previous scenarios. And that is because you don't get the natural reflection from it. That is something that has been recently demonstrated on a GDC. In GDC, that's a games developer conference where they showed, it was a demo by Epic Games, the creators of Unreal Engine, and they use actual real-time tracing from reflections, and that's incredibly expensive, but it's something that will happen later in the future.
That's not something you're gonna see in Attila and in Rise of Mordor.
Exactly. But yeah, it's gonna come down later. But this is an issue that you have when you're writing those reflections yourself, and you're gonna keep them random. That you will not be able to really. You will keep them flexible, but it will hurt you in specific scenarios, such as this snowy environment, you know. And luckily, it's something that we can look into. Somebody else did that. There is a graphics mod called Aztec's graphics mod, I believe. It's on Steam's workshop.
Aztecs?
And Aztec.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does a decent job in terms of colors. It makes it a lot more saturated, more alive, and a bit brighter as well. But it doesn't fully combat the issue of the units looking too dark, you know. And I've got two images here. This is from Thrones of Britannia, and despite having like 10 pixels, you can still see that the units are incredibly dark, even though it's broad daylight. And that is because of, first of all, the engine is still the same as Attila, and that is now 5 years, if not 6 years. 6 years if you take development old. And this shouldn't really be the case. And that is something called Screen Space Ambient Occlusion, shortened to SSAO. And I really recommend turning that off, because that thing works really well if you're doing close-ups. Because what it does, it gives you these soft and detailed shadows, but it tries to work from far as well. But from far you got LODs, you don't have enough pixels technically to work with. So what happens is it will clump it together, and it will just create this really dark blob. And so that's one of those things to turn off as well, to just sort of help to combat the issue. And this last image is just sort of shows how even CA can't really make their games look good, if that makes sense.
Right. I can really see it there, and I've seen it in a few of my games I've done in Thrones of Britannia, and that, I mean, they run into the same thing where the promotional material is a lot brighter than what you actually see in game, and yeah, I guess it really does come down to engine limitations.
Exactly. So this is a good example of just them not being to really replicate proper. I mean, perhaps they are realistic in a way, but just when you look at the chainmail, the metal, these values not only feel off, but they are just artificially too dark.
There's a lot of black in there.
Yeah, exactly. And you have this huge issue of just units becoming one blob, and that is something that really wasn't visually. It wasn't the case with Medieval 2, and that is just units blending together graphically, you know. And that's something that Attila, Rome, Thrones of Britannia, even technically the Warhammer series, they have, because of the modern realistic shade. Warhammer can fight it because they have different creature types. The silhouette really helps to break this blob thing, but you can't really do that in realistic scenarios.
So
but yeah,
I have a question now. You guys obviously chose the Attila engine for a very good reason. Did you guys know about these kind of shader limitations when you were moving into like early development for the project? Was it something you found out about later? Was it just, we can do so much with the Attila engine that it's fine if we have to deal with things being a little bit darker?
I don't think we really knew about it. First of all, most of us were really amateur when we started doing the mod.
It's been so long at this point, you just can't remember that far back.
Yeah, exactly. But again, there's something that we can't really affect. Like it's it's perhaps, as I mentioned, because it's mostly down to the environment, lighting, and reflections, and those are being faked through text, and people manage to change this text. So again, if we look into it, we can perhaps change it. But it's not something that is that important to us, because in the long run, it might change, especially if a new Total War comes out, or if a game that is more mod friendly than Attila is. Stuff like the campaign map. It's a huge issue, and technically we can edit certain stuff. Jock's been looking into the pathfinding and into terrain, and we are getting progress without CA's contribution. But there are certain issues that we can't just do on our own. Even stuff like the sound, that used to be a simple thing back with Medieval 2 or whatever other game that you name. It's just you get a sound file, you convert it to a WAV file, you make sure that the bitrate is correct, and that's it. It works in game, but not with Attila, because they have a special file type, and so there are so many limitations that we will not be able to replicate Third Age. Mm-hmm. We will not be able to replicate movies, but we can simulate them technically.
Right. And I think that's actually a point that kind of bears a little bit of emphasis, and maybe that's what a lot of people were expecting when they were moving into Rise of Mordor, that it would just be a shinier version of Third Age, and maybe when it turned out that wasn't the case because of engine limitations, people were a little bit disappointed. But it's this really kind of helps shed a little bit of light on that, and I'm sure once people know, there'll be a little bit more understanding.
Oh yeah, I hope so. Again, I really just wanted to get this out, because I emphasize with those people again. I understand why they feel that way. It was just about trying to explain it. Again, what are the causes for this, and just get it out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, was there anything else that you wanted to address on this particular topic, or do we have time for a few kind of general questions about the mod?
No, I think you can hit me up if you have any questions.
Well, okay. Not without wanting to get too far off of topic. I think one of the things that a lot of people have on their mind is what do you guys have coming down the pipe for Rise of Mordor in the future? At the moment, I know campaign is on a bit of a hiatus, and that's been a really big thorn in your guys' side. So, and a lot's been said on the campaign, so we'll put the campaign aside. But in terms of factions and units and just kind of where you guys want to take the mod at this point, is there anything that you could tell me?
I'm just going to comment on the campaign. So we are making slow and steady progress in certain aspects. Like it's a really experimental way. So experimental case, because there's so much that we don't understand, and we just need to play with it to understand it. That's it. And then we can understand and know what we don't know, if that makes sense. So the campaign is doable.
That is good to know.
To a certain to a certain extent. But it's such an unknown region that we simply cannot afford to put our brightest people to work on it while different aspects need development. So Jock's been doing management and environment. We got loads of Gondorian buildings coming up. We will be able to have a full Gondorian fortress playable, so that will help a lot with this immersion issue. We got Vikus back, the original mod.
Oh, awesome!
Founder. So he's now doing Rohan units, so that is something that is finally in development fully. We got people doing some sort of balancing here and there. Again, we have unofficial submods, and then we have official submods, such as the 1v1 campaign of the based on the DLC.
I saw that one on Jackie Fish's channel.
Yes, that was something that was again, because our mod is not supposed to require any DLC. That is sort of Jox's mentality, and that's just something that we agreed on. But in terms of testing the campaign and experimenting with it, we allow this official submod to be the way to sort of experiment. And I'll be just polishing Isengard. There were some issues with the scouts, with the lower tier variants, and then I'm moving on Elves. So hopefully we'll be able to get some Elven parade during summer.
That's gonna make a lot of people out there really, really happy. I know people have been clamoring for the Elves ever since you guys released the roster kind of concept along with the unicards and things like that. So that's really good to hear.
Yes. Again, like there's just about 10 people working on the mod. I would say it's, again, most of us are university students. So now that thing is technically over, or again the semester is over, that's when we get time to actually work on the mod.
That is really good to hear. One other question is sort of a little bit less related to the mod and more related to yourself. This is a project that's been going on for a really long time, and I'm not too sure how long you've been on the team for. But there's this is obviously a labor of love. There's a ton of work that goes into Rise of Mordor. What makes you want to dedicate your free time to that? Is it just a passion for creating art in general? You said you were an art student, or is there something else?
So again, I've been doing this for way too long. I mean, modding in general, but it's something that got me into the gaming industry in general, in total, yeah, it's mostly a passion that I have for the visuals of the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, and that got me then into Tolkien properly, and just like any other mod, we and I personally rely on my motivation, or that's what I used to do for the community. But nowadays, it's a career path itself, because I would love to go to CA, to work at CA one day, and I've been in contact with them, and so sort of now I can get into proper feedback loop with them, which sort of thing. Exactly. So that sort of helps me to further improve the work that I do for Rise of Mordor, and so it not only becomes a hobby, but a career in a way.
Well, that's awesome. I wish you the best of luck with that. It's great to see someone who's kind of following their passion and being really successful at it. I have one final question, and it has to do with a unit that we saw, I believe it was on Jackie Fish's channel, and that's kind of undergoing a little bit of workshopping, and that would be the trolls. And I'm sure many people out there are just as curious as I am. Where do you think the trolls are going to be?
The trolls. Okay, so we got an animator working on them at the moment as well. I believe that we've redone them so that they are based on elephants. I think it's elephants, so that they can get the proper locomotion and the mechanics of like a creature that is supposed to slam through and just sort of charge through anyone, not be stunned and staggered.
Have a satisfying amount of weight behind it.
Exactly. So that is technically that. But again, he's been missing weapons, although the weapons are finished as far as I know, but they weren't properly linked to it. So now it's just down to animations, and to get those animations to properly work in combat with humans. When that will be done, I don't know. again, the animations are done by a student, so hopefully we will get some update on it soon.
Not to toot our own horn, but Reforged team does have a pretty talented animator, Crimson Behelit, who's done a lot of more custom animations for some of our troll units. So if you guys are in need of any assistance at that level, then I can put you in touch with them if you need.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. I'll ask Jokes and see if we can get if he would be interested to give us a hand. But again, it probably wouldn't be necessary, because I know that, especially if you're doing animations, the last thing you want is to somebody else to work on it at the same time.
Right.
It's at this point it's down to having a certain set of animations, not necessarily variants of animations, because that's a luxury that we cannot afford. But again, we need to get those key animations done, and then it's a process of testing and polishing, and I think that's the major issue once the animations are done. But yeah.
Right.
But thanks for the heads up.
Yeah, no problem. I kind of volunteered him for the task anyway, but I'm sure he'd love to help out. So I think that's, unless there was another issue that you wanted to talk about a little bit, I think that's probably about good for the day.
All right. Well, I thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for your time, and I really look forward to seeing what you guys come out with over the summer when you guys have some time.
All right. We will not let you down.
Oh, I'm sure you won't. You haven't so far. All right. Thank you so much.